Every job I applied to already knew my name before I even introduced myself, and not in a good way. I would walk in, shake hands, sit down, and within minutes, I'd see it. That subtle shift in their eyes, like they were already disappointed. It happened at a small accounting office on Maple Street, then again at a retail store 15 miles across town, and again at a medical supply warehouse where I had years of experience. Different places, different people, same outcome. "We'll be in touch," they'd say, but their tone always meant the same thing.
No.
I stopped counting after the 7th rejection, but I kept every letter, neatly folded, stacked on my kitchen table like quiet evidence of something I didn't yet understand. I told myself it was just bad luck, that maybe at 68, employers were looking for someone younger, faster, easier. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One afternoon, I decided to ask. The hiring manager at a local bookstore seemed kind, the kind of woman who still believed in honesty. I sat across from her, my hands folded in my lap, and said, "Please, just tell me the truth. Is there something I'm missing?" She hesitated, her smile tightening just slightly, and then she said something that made my chest go still. "We received a call about you," she said carefully. "A reference. They warned us." I blinked. "A reference?" I asked. "I didn't list anyone." She looked confused for a moment, then glanced down at her notes. "It was a woman." She sounded concerned. "Said you had a history of taking things that didn't belong to you." The room felt smaller somehow. I thanked her, stood up, and walked out like nothing had happened, but the words followed me all the way home. A woman. A voice speaking for me where I had never given permission. That night, I sat at the dinner table with my son Daniel and his wife Rachel. The plates were set, the food was warm, and everything looked exactly the way it always had. Daniel talked about work. Rachel smiled politely, asking if I needed anything, her tone sweet in that practiced way of hers. I nodded, played along, past the salt. But I watched her. The way her eyes flickered just slightly when I mentioned the interview. The way Daniel avoided looking at me altogether. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I just listened to the silence between their words. Because in that moment, something inside me settled into place. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been speaking for me long before I ever walked into those rooms. And the truth was, I think I had known for longer than I wanted to admit. I just needed to be sure. So I smiled, took a sip of my tea, and let them believe I was still in the dark. Because if they thought I was weak, if they thought I would just keep accepting rejection after rejection, then they were about to learn something very important. I had already started preparing for this, and I was going to let them go just far enough to regret it. I woke up the next morning before sunrise, the house still quiet, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful but now felt heavy, like it was holding on to something unspoken. I made my coffee the same way I had for years, 2 spoons of ground beans, a slow pour of hot water, watching the steam rise as if it might carry my thoughts away with it. The rejection letters were still on the table where I had left them, perfectly aligned, each one polite, each one final. I sat down and read them again, not for the words themselves, but for what they had in common. Every single one had come within 24 hours of my interview. Every single one had mentioned concerns, without ever explaining what those concerns were. It was too consistent to be coincidence. I reached for my notebook, the one I used to keep track of grocery lists and doctor appointments, and I started writing down the names of every place I had applied to, every person I had spoken with, every date, and time I could remember. Then I circled one detail that stood out more than the others. Timing. Whoever was doing this knew exactly when I had interviews scheduled. That was not something a stranger could guess. That required access. I closed the notebook slowly and looked toward the hallway, where I could hear Rachel moving around in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, the quiet hum of someone completely at ease. I stepped into the doorway and watched her for a moment without saying anything. She was standing by the counter, scrolling through her phone, her expression calm, almost bored. "You are up early," she said without looking at me. Her voice was light, casual. I nodded. "Could not sleep," I replied. She smiled then, a small, polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "You should not worry so much," she said. "Things have a way of working out." I studied her face, the smooth confidence in her tone, the certainty behind her words, and I felt something settle even deeper inside me. She was not guessing. She was not hoping. She knew. Later that afternoon, when the house was empty, I picked up the phone and started making calls. Not to apply for jobs, but to ask questions. I kept my voice steady, friendly, careful. "I just wanted to follow up," I would say. "Is there anything specific that concerned you?" Most of them hesitated. Some avoided the question. But one man, older, direct, did not. "Ma'am," he said, "we received a very detailed warning about you. I am surprised you do not know." I closed my eyes for a second, letting the words sink in. "What kind of warning?" I asked. There was a pause on the line. "That you had taken money from previous employers," he said. "That hiring you would be a risk." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in silence, the phone still in my hand. Not just a rumor. Not just a careless comment. A pattern. A story, repeated carefully, consistently, designed to follow me wherever I went. I looked around the living room, at the family photos on the wall, at the smiling faces captured in moments that now felt distant and unfamiliar. Then I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and opened the small lockbox I had kept hidden for years. Inside were documents, old bank statements, and something else I had started collecting quietly over the past few weeks. Evidence. I had not known exactly what I would find when I began, but I had trusted my instincts enough to prepare. And now, as the pieces began to come together, I realized I had been right to do so. This was not just about finding a job. This was about someone trying to control the narrative of my life. And I was not going to let them finish writing it. That evening, I set the table the same way I always did, 3 plates, 3 glasses, everything in its place, as if routine alone could hold the world together. Daniel came home first, his tie loosened, his eyes tired, but there was something else there too, something quieter, something that looked a lot like avoidance. He greeted me with a quick nod instead of his usual hug, moving past me as if he had somewhere more important to be, even though he did not. Rachel followed a few minutes later, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor, her expression composed, almost too composed. She smiled when she saw me, that same careful smile, polished and controlled. "Dinner smells wonderful," she said, setting her bag down neatly by the door. I thanked her and served the food, watching the two of them settle into their seats across from me. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, the weather, the price of groceries, a neighbor who had moved out last week. Daniel kept his eyes on his plate, nodding at the right moments, but rarely speaking. Rachel carried most of the conversation, filling the space with ease, guiding it away from anything that might matter. I let her. I listened. And I waited. "I had another interview today," I said finally, my voice calm, steady, as if it were just another passing detail. Daniel paused for a fraction of a second, his fork hovering midair before he set it down. Rachel looked up immediately, her interest sharp but disguised behind concern. "Oh," she said. "How did it go?" I took a sip of water before answering. "It went well," I said. "Until it did not." She tilted her head slightly, studying me now. "What do you mean?" I met her eyes, holding her gaze just long enough to notice the flicker there, the brief tightening around the edges. "They said they had been warned about me," I replied. Silence settled over the table, thick and immediate. Daniel shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, but he did not look at me. Rachel let out a small, sympathetic laugh, the kind people use when they want to dismiss something without confronting it. "That sounds like a misunderstanding," she said smoothly. "You know how people talk." I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "Yes," I said. "People do talk." I let the sentence hang there unfinished, giving it space to breathe. Rachel reached for her glass, her movements precise, controlled, but I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she lifted it. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low, uncertain. "Mom, maybe you are overthinking it," he said. "The job market is tough right now." I turned to him, studying his face, the way he avoided meeting my eyes, the way his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe," I said quietly. And I meant it, at least on the surface. Because that was what they needed to believe. That I was unsure. That I was still searching for answers instead of already holding them in my hands. The rest of the dinner passed in a careful balance of normalcy, each word chosen, each silence measured. When it was over, Rachel cleared the plates, humming softly under her breath, as if nothing at all had shifted. Daniel retreated to the living room, turning on the television but not really watching it. I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, the warm water running over my hands, grounding me in something real. And as I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, faint and blurred against the darkness outside, I realized something that changed everything. This was not just about what they had done. It was about how long they had been doing it, how many doors had been closed before I ever reached them, how many conversations had happened without me. I dried my hands slowly, turned off the light, and walked back to my room without another word. Because the next step was not going to be a question. It was going to be proof. And I already knew exactly where to find it. The next morning, I did not rush. I did not confront anyone. I simply waited until the house settled into its usual rhythm. Daniel leaving early for work, Rachel lingering just long enough to finish her coffee before heading out with that same composed expression she wore like a shield. When the front door finally closed and the sound of her car faded down the street, the silence returned. But this time it felt different. It felt like an opening. I walked back to the dining table and opened my notebook again, reviewing the names, the dates, the patterns I had carefully written down. Then I added one more column. Time of day. I started to notice something subtle but important. Most of the calls that must have been made about me happened shortly after I scheduled my interviews, not days later, not randomly, but with precision. Whoever was doing this was not guessing. They were watching. I closed the notebook and picked up my phone, scrolling through my recent messages, my calendar, every small detail that could reveal how someone might know my schedule. There was only one place where everything aligned. The shared family calendar Rachel had insisted we all use months ago, claiming it would make things easier, more organized. At the time, it had seemed harmless, even helpful. Now it looked different. I opened it and stared at the entries, each interview carefully marked, each time slot visible to anyone with access. I felt a slow, steady clarity settle over me. This was not care. This was control. I did not react right away. Instead, I did something I had learned to do many years ago, long before any of this began. I prepared quietly. I walked into my room and retrieved my phone, the older one I kept tucked away, rarely used but fully functional. Then I set it up on the kitchen counter, angled just slightly, nothing obvious, nothing out of place. That afternoon, when Rachel returned, I greeted her the same way I always did, calm, polite, predictable. She moved through the house with ease, checking her messages, making small talk, completely unaware of the shift that had already taken place. "I might have another interview tomorrow," I said casually, watching her reaction carefully. She paused for just a second, then smiled. "That is wonderful," she replied. "I am sure this one will go better." I nodded, as if I believed her, as if I had not already begun to see the pattern behind her words. The next step was simple. I added a new entry to the shared calendar, clear and visible, an interview scheduled for 10 in the morning at a company I had not actually applied to. Then I waited. I did not need to follow her. I did not need to guess. If I was right, the pattern would repeat itself. And if it did, I would not just have suspicion. I would have proof. That evening, as we sat down to dinner again, everything looked exactly the same as it had the night before. The same plates, the same routine, the same carefully constructed normal. But underneath it, something had changed completely. I was no longer trying to understand what was happening. I was watching it unfold, step by step, exactly as I expected it to. And for the first time since this all began, I was not the one being caught off guard. I was the one setting the stage. I woke up the next morning with a calm I had not felt in weeks, the kind that comes when uncertainty finally gives way to clarity. I did not rush to check anything. I did not open my notebook right away. Instead, I made my coffee, sat by the window, and waited for the day to reveal itself. Around 10:15, I picked up my phone and made a call, not to apply for a job, but to the company I had listed on the calendar the night before. A place I had never contacted. A place that should not have known my name at all. The receptionist answered, polite and professional, and I introduced myself as if I had an interview scheduled. There was a brief pause on the line, the soft clicking of keys, and then she said something that confirmed everything. Yes, we were told about you, she said carefully. We have decided not to move forward. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. Not surprise. Not shock. Just confirmation. May I ask who told you? I said gently. Another pause, longer this time. A woman called this morning, she replied. She said she was familiar with your work history and wanted to warn us. I thanked her, ended the call, and set the phone down slowly on the table. The room was completely silent, but inside my mind, everything was loud and clear. The timing was exact. The story was consistent. The source was no longer a question. I did not feel anger the way I thought I might. What I felt was something colder, something steadier. Understanding. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the small phone I had left positioned the day before, still exactly where I had placed it, still recording, still quietly doing its job. I picked it up and scrolled through the footage, my fingers steady, my breathing even. There she was, Rachel, standing right where I had expected her to be, phone in hand, voice low but unmistakable. I did not need to hear every word to understand what she was doing, but I listened anyway, carefully, deliberately. Each sentence she spoke was calm, controlled, practiced. She sounded concerned, responsible, convincing. Anyone on the other end of that call would have believed her without hesitation. I let the recording play to the end, then saved it, backing it up to a second device without rushing, without emotion. This was no longer about proving a suspicion. This was evidence. I set the phone down and looked around the house again. The same walls, the same furniture, the same quiet spaces that had witnessed everything without saying a word. And for the first time, I allowed myself to see the full picture. This had not started recently. This had been happening for weeks, maybe longer. Every rejection, every closed door, every polite dismissal had been carefully arranged. Not to hurt me quickly, but to wear me down slowly, to make me question myself, to make me dependent. I thought about the shared calendar, the conversations at dinner, the subtle guidance, the quiet redirection of my life. None of it had been random. All of it had been designed. I stood there for a long moment, then reached for my notebook and added one final line beneath the others. Proof confirmed. The words looked simple on the page, almost ordinary, but I knew what they meant. This was the point where everything changed. That evening, when Rachel walked through the door, she greeted me the same way she always did, smiling, composed, unaware that the ground beneath her had already shifted. I returned her smile just as calmly, because now I was no longer trying to figure out what she was doing. I was deciding when to show her that I knew. That night, I did not review the recording again. I did not need to. I already knew what it contained, and more importantly, I knew what it meant. Instead, I sat in my room with a small lockbox open beside me, organizing everything I had gathered so far, each piece placed carefully, each detail accounted for. The recording, the rejection letters, the notes in my handwriting that traced the pattern step by step. It was not just evidence anymore. It was a timeline. A story that could not be denied once it was seen all at once. I added one more thing to the box that evening. A printed copy of the shared calendar, each interview highlighted in yellow, each corresponding rejection marked in red. Side by side, the pattern was unmistakable. I closed the lid gently, locked it, and slid it back into its place, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The next morning, I moved through the house the same way I always did, slow, steady, predictable. Rachel watched me at breakfast, her expression soft, almost reassuring. You seem better today, she said. More relaxed. I smiled faintly. I think I am, I replied. And that part was true. There was a strange kind of peace that came with no longer questioning reality. Daniel glanced between us, his brow slightly furrowed, as if he could sense something he could not quite name. "That is good," he said, but his voice carried hesitation, like he was unsure what he was agreeing to. I finished my coffee and stood up, rinsing my cup in the sink. "I have been thinking," I said, my tone light, casual. "We should have a proper dinner this weekend. All of us. Sit down, take our time." Rachel's eyes lit up immediately, her smile widening just enough to seem genuine. "That sounds lovely," she said. "It has been a while since we have done that." Daniel nodded, though more slowly. "Sure, Mom," he added. "That could be nice." I turned slightly, drying my hands, keeping my movements calm, unhurried. "I will take care of everything," I said. "You just need to be there." They agreed, without hesitation. Why would they not? To them, this was normal. Routine. Another evening where I would cook, serve, and keep the peace. They did not see what I was building beneath that surface. Over the next 2 days, I prepared carefully, not just the meal, but the moment. I contacted someone I trusted, someone who understood documents, records, and the weight of proof. I did not explain everything, only enough to ensure that what I had would be taken seriously when the time came. Then I made copies. Multiple copies. One for myself, one stored safely elsewhere, and one set aside for the right moment. I rehearsed nothing. I planned no speech. Because I did not need words to carry this. The truth would do that on its own. By the time Saturday arrived, the house looked exactly as it always did before a family dinner. Clean, warm, inviting. The table was set with care, the same plates, the same glasses, the same quiet details that suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Rachel complimented the arrangement when she walked in, her tone light, her posture relaxed. Daniel followed, loosening his sleeves, settling into his seat as if this evening would pass like any other. I took my place across from them, folding my hands neatly in front of me, and for a moment I simply looked at them, not with anger, not with accusation, but with clarity, because they still believed they were in control of the story, and in a way they had been. Up until now. I reached beside my chair and placed a small, sealed envelope on the table, right between us, not opening it, not explaining it, just letting it sit there quietly. Rachel's eyes flickered to it for a fraction of a second before she looked back at me, her smile unchanged. "What is that?" she asked lightly. I met her gaze, calm and steady. "Something I think we should all look at together," I said. And then I waited, knowing that for the first time since this began, the next move would not be theirs. For a moment, no one moved. The envelope sat there between us, quiet, unremarkable, but heavy in a way that could not be ignored. Rachel's eyes returned to it again, just briefly, then back to me, her smile still in place, though I could see the effort behind it now. "Well," she said lightly, "are you going to tell us what it is?" I shook my head once slowly. "No, irraplia. I think it is better if we all see it together." Daniel shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping once against the table before going still. "Mom, what is going on?" he asked, his voice uncertain, caught somewhere between concern and discomfort. I did not answer him directly. Instead, I reached forward, placed my hand on the envelope, and slid it gently toward the center of the table. "Open it," I said. Rachel hesitated, just for a second, then leaned forward, her movements controlled, precise, as if she were determined to keep everything exactly as it had been. She opened the envelope carefully, pulling out the contents one piece at a time. First, the printed calendar, then the copies of the rejection letters, then finally the transcript. I watched her eyes as she read, the way her expression shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. Confusion first, then recognition, then something else entirely. Daniel leaned closer, trying to follow along, his brow tightening as he began to understand what he was looking at. "What is this?" he asked, his voice sharper now. I folded my hands again, resting them calmly on the table. "It is a timeline," I said. "Every interview I scheduled, every call that followed, every rejection that came within hours." Rachel set the papers down slowly, too slowly, as if she needed the extra time to think. "That does not prove anything," she said, her tone still smooth, but no longer as steady as before. I nodded. "You're right," I said. "By itself, it does not." I reached beside my chair again and placed a second item on the table, smaller this time, a phone. I did not unlock it. I did not press play. I simply set it down where they could both see it. But this does. Daniel's eyes moved from me to the phone, then back again, uncertainty giving way to something heavier. "Mom," he began, but the word faded before he could finish. Rachel did not speak at all. She was looking at the phone now, not touching it, not moving, just staring at it with a stillness that said more than any denial could. I let the silence stretch, not rushing to fill it, not offering explanations they had not asked for. Because this was the moment where everything shifted, not because of what I would say, but because of what they already knew. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Play it." Daniel reached for the phone, his hand unsteady, and pressed the screen. The recording began, soft at first, then clearer. Rachel's voice filled the room, calm, composed, unmistakable. Every word she had spoken, every warning she had given, laid out plainly, without distortion, without context to hide behind. Daniel froze, his expression draining of color, his eyes fixed on the device as if it might change if he looked at it long enough. Rachel remained perfectly still, her face unreadable now, the careful mask she had worn, beginning to crack at the edges. I watched them both, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a quiet certainty, because this was no longer about what I believed. It was about what could no longer be denied. And as the recording continued, filling the space between us, I realized something I had not fully understood until that moment. They had spent all this time trying to control my story, but they had never considered what would happen when I decided to tell it myself. The recording ended, but the silence that followed felt louder than anything that had come before it. Daniel slowly lowered the phone onto the table, his hand lingering there as if he needed something solid to hold on to. He did not look at me. He did not look at Rachel either. His eyes stayed fixed on the surface of the table, unfocused, distant, as if he were trying to rearrange everything he had just heard into something that made sense. Rachel, on the other hand, did not move at all. She sat perfectly still, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her, the picture of composure. But I could see it now, the small fractures beneath that surface, the way her breathing had changed, the way her fingers pressed just slightly into one another. "That is not what it sounds like," she said finally, her voice calm, measured, almost gentle. The kind of tone designed to smooth things over, to reshape reality before it could settle. I tilted my head slightly, watching her. "Then what does it sound like?" I asked. She held my gaze, and for a moment, I could see her searching for the right version of the truth, the one that would hold together just long enough to regain control. "I was trying to help," she said. "You have been struggling, and I thought maybe it would be better if you did not take on something too demanding. I did not want you to get hurt." Daniel let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. He finally looked up, his eyes moving between us, confusion and something deeper beginning to take shape. "You told them she was a thief," he said, his voice low, unsteady. Rachel did not flinch. "I exaggerated," she replied softly. "Sometimes people need to hear things in a certain way to understand what is best." I let the words settle, not interrupting, not reacting immediately, because this was exactly what I had expected. Not denial, not panic, but justification, control, even now, slipping only slightly. "You wanted me to stay here," I said, my voice even, dependent, with no other options. She met my eyes again, and this time, she did not look away. "I wanted what was best for this family," she said. "Things were easier when everything was stable." Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, the sound sharp against the quiet room. "Stable," he repeated. "You ruined her chances to work. You lied about her to strangers." His voice was rising now, not in anger, but in disbelief, like he was only just beginning to understand the shape of what had been happening around him. Rachel turned to him, her expression softening, her tone shifting again, trying to draw him back into her version of things. "Daniel, listen to me," she said. "I was protecting us. You know how difficult things have been. We cannot afford more complications. I watched them both, the way the conversation shifted, the way she tried to pull him back into alignment, the way he resisted, uncertain, but no longer fully under her influence. And then I spoke again, quietly, but with a clarity that cut through everything else. I have already shared copies of everything, I said, with someone outside this house. Rachel's eyes flickered for the first time, a brief, unmistakable break in her composure. Daniel turned to me sharply. What do you mean? He asked. I folded my hands again. Calm, steady. It means this does not stay here, I said. It does not disappear because we choose not to talk about it. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was different. Heavier. Final. Because the balance had shifted completely. Rachel could no longer control the story. Daniel could no longer ignore it. And I was no longer asking questions. I was deciding what came next. Daniel did not speak right away. He sat there, staring at the table as if the answers might appear if he waited long enough, his shoulders slightly hunched, his entire posture different from the man who had walked into the room just an hour before. Rachel remained composed, but it was no longer the same kind of composure. It was tighter now, more deliberate, like something she had to actively maintain instead of something that came naturally. You should not have done that, she said finally, her voice quieter, but with a firmness that had not been there before. I looked at her, not surprised by the shift, not affected by it.
No, irreplica only.
You should not have. The words settled between us, simple and direct, without the need for anything more. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair before finally looking up at me. Mom, he said, his voice strained, why did you not say anything sooner? I held his gaze, steady and clear. Because I needed to understand how far it went, I said. And because I needed to be sure. He nodded faintly, as if that answer made sense, even if he did not like it. Rachel leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression sharpening just a little. So what now? She asked. There was no apology in her tone, no regret, only calculation. I noticed that. I had expected it. Now, I said, things change. I reached beside me and picked up another folder, placing it gently on the table next to the envelope. I have already spoken with someone who specializes in situations like this. I continued. What you did has consequences. Not just here, not just between us, but beyond this house. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Legal consequences? He asked. I did not rush my answer. That depends on what happens next, I said. Rachel's lips pressed together, her fingers tightening slightly against the table. For the first time, there was no easy response, no smooth explanation waiting to take control of the moment. You are overreacting, she said, but the words did not carry the same weight they once did. I shook my head once, to go any further. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression changed again, something final settling into place. It already has, he replied. I remained seated, calm, composed, observing the moment as it unfolded exactly as I had expected it would. This was never about raising my voice or demanding anything. It was about letting the truth stand on its own, undeniable and complete. I gathered the papers slowly, not in a rush, not with any sign of urgency, because I was not the one trying to regain control. I had already done that. As I stood up from the table, I looked at both of them one last time, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet clarity that needed no explanation. I gave you the chance to be honest, I said. You chose something else.